Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we will be exploring the concept of quantum computing. Let's get started. But first of all, what is the point of quantum computing? Why do we need such small computers? Well, the answer lies in how powerful they are, their sheer efficiency. Now, a 64-bit classical computer could process 8 values per step, and that's not bad for a classical computer. However, a quantum computer, hold your breath, a 64-qubit quantum computer can process 30 billion values in parallel. Think about just how powerful that is compared to the 8 values per step and the 30 billion values per step. Obviously, the quantum computer is much more powerful than the classical computer. But how do we get there? Let's start off by looking at the basics of a classical computer itself and then moving on to quantum computers, understanding the difference between classical and quantum computers. Now, you see, classical computers are based around this idea of bits. And bits are binary entities. They can store information with zeros and ones, which are binary numbers. For instance, the letter A has an ASCII value of 65, which can be represented with the binary number 10000001. And these binary entities are what computers are able to understand and process. Almost all the information in your hard disk is stored in the form of bits. And multiple bits make up a byte, a gigabyte, a terabyte, and so on. Logic gates are also an essential of classical computing. They are essentially tiny gates that allow particular configurations of information to flow through them. There are over 7 types of logic gates in classical computers. For instance, there's the AND gate and the NOT gate, also called an inverter. Essentially, the AND gate gives an output of 1 only if all of its inputs are 1. And the NOT gate gives an output of 1 only if both of its inputs are 0 or vice versa. There are multiple types of these logic gates, including the XOR gate, the OR gate, the NAND gate, and so on. Logic gates are made up of tiny building blocks called transistors. Now, combinations or multiple logic gates can help us perform mathematical operations which are essential to any computer. Using these logic gates, you can add and you can subtract. If you can add and subtract, you can multiply. And if you can multiply, you can divide. And with these 4 basic operations, you can do practically any mathematical operation that one is capable of doing. Combinations of logic gates can also help us store and process data. For instance, there's this one circuit called the flip-flop that remembers the previous values that pass through it. And an integrated system of these flip-flops yields an amazing way to store data. And this is what made early computers so large. The transistors, the building blocks of the logic gates themselves, were very large, making the logic gates and all the other core circuits essential to the computer very large, making the computer almost as large as a room. Now, on to quantum computing. Now, quantum computing at its core is slightly similar to classical computing. We have almost the same building block. In the classical computer, it's called the bit, whereas in the quantum computer, it's called the qubit. Now, what is it that makes the bit so different from the qubit? Well, a qubit is not as abstract as a bit. In fact, a qubit is an actual physical entity. Let's first have a look at the inner workings of quantum mechanics. Essentially, quantum mechanics revolves around the absurd properties of subatomic particles. Yes, classical physics does not apply to quantum particles or subatomic particles. You may have heard from many that the building blocks of everything in life are atoms. Well, this is not true. Atoms in themselves are made up of electrons and nucleons. Here, electrons are a fundamental particle. They cannot be broken down any further. However, recent research has revealed that they may actually be strings like all other quantum particles, but that's a topic for another video. Nucleons are protons and neutrons, and they are made up of fundamental particles called quarks and held together by bosons called gluons. All of these are subatomic particles, and they do not obey the laws of classical physics. They also have some very distinct properties that we wouldn't see otherwise. For instance, a quark has the properties of charge, spin, and mass. Charge and spin are slightly abstract, especially at the quantum level, where it's difficult to define anything. Much like the periodic table in chemistry, quantum physics has its own periodic table. It's called the Standard Model of Elementary Particles, and here's a picture of it. It is divided into all of these categories of quantum particles. Those include the fermions, the bosons, the leptons, among other categories of particles. Now let's have a look at some of the quantum properties that are given to these quantum objects. There is a clear difference between a tennis ball and a quark. Now, quantum particles experience this property called superposition. Okay. So there is this property of quantum particles which is called spin. And to keep it simple, let us take up spin and down spin, right? Binary. It can either be up or it can be down. But wait a minute, is that really the case? As far as what superposition tells us, a quantum object can be in a state, its spin can be in a state of up, down, or a superposition of both of these values. And superposition is essentially a mixed state, where there's a certain probability of it being an upspin and a certain probability of it being a downspin. And whenever this quantum object is observed, its state immediately collapses from superposition into a state of either up or down. And when it's not being observed, it's in a state of superposition. Now, superposition opens up a world of infinite possibilities. These probabilities, the probability distribution of upspin and downspin are infinite, right? This means that we can store lots of values in parallel compared to a classical computer. And this quantum property of superposition is what differentiates bits from qubits. Bits can be in a state of 0 or 1, while quantum bits or qubits can be in a state of 0, 1 or superposition, which is the key over here. It's what makes these qubits so much more powerful than classical bits. Now, the states of a qubit can correspond to the following Dirac matrix. It shows us a set of 1 by 2 matrices. So the state 0 corresponds to the matrix 1, 0, while the state 1 corresponds to the matrix 0, 1. And the weird brackets that you see around the states are essentially part of what is known as bracket notation. Now, because of this property of superposition, it gives us another new property to play with, and that is called entanglement. Entanglement is essentially when two qubits are related in such a way that a change in one qubit instantaneously reflects in the other qubit when it is measured, regardless of the distance between them within no time at all. For instance, if I have this quantum system A and quantum system B, and both of these systems are in superposition, and if I were to entangle both of these, then a change in quantum system A would instantly reflect in quantum system B, regardless of the distance between them, and this change would occur within no time at all. It's still a mystery as to how this happens, but it does happen. And this is also a property that can be exploited in quantum computing. This symbol, the symbol that we are seeing over here, quantum system A entangled with quantum system B, the circle cross in the center is essentially a symbol that means that both of these quantum systems have been entangled, and we'll go a bit deeper into that in a little while. Now, because quantum computers are this powerful, it renders pretty much all other functions of classical computers worthless. For instance, there exists this encryption algorithm called RSA. And RSA is a system used for safe data and transcriptions. It involves a public and a private key, both of which are close to 256 digit long prime numbers. That means they would take very long to crack. This makes them extremely powerful. And they would take a very long time to crack with classical computers. However, with quantum computers, these codes can be cracked in the blink of an eye because of the exponentially increased number of values that can be processed and stored in parallel due to the property of superposition. Now, the increased number of states opens the possibilities for new types of logic gates. So we have the classical logic gate, and now we have the quantum gate. So to proceed any further, let's understand the idea of a Bloch sphere. This is a Bloch sphere. No, don't be confused by it. Essentially, this Bloch sphere is a two-dimensional probabilistic representation of a qubit, albeit an approximation. And what transformations that we can do within this Bloch sphere are not the same as doing the transformations on the qubit itself. Now, looking at this diagram, you can see that the poles of the Bloch sphere represent the exact values of 0 and 1 respectively. And the area of the surface in between these poles is what represents what is called a Bloch multivector, which is the probability of it being either 0 or 1, to put it in simple terms. Now, let us move into the quantum gates themselves. Here's an example of a quantum gate, the Hadamard gate, represented by the letter H. Now, this is a very interesting gate and probably one of the most useful. What the Hadamard gate does is essentially to create superposition within a qubit. In terms of the Bloch sphere, what it's doing is it's rotating the Bloch sphere on the x-axis and then on the y-axis, and this is what creates superposition of the qubit. Now, I would like to remind you that rotating the Bloch sphere isn't the same as rotating a qubit itself, because a Bloch sphere is just a representation of the qubit. So here's what a circuit that creates entanglement between qubits would look like. It's one of the most basic circuits, really. The Hadamard gate creates superposition on the qubit Q0, while the controlled X gate is creating entanglement between both of those qubits. Here we have a quantum circuit that is creating superposition in the qubit Q0. Again, we have the Hadamard gate, which is creating superposition on the qubit. And what is interesting, I'm using a simulator here, but it's still interesting that the moment that I measure the state of Q0, it immediately collapses into a state of 0 or 1. So here is the probability distribution of it being either 0 or 1 without the measurement. And you can see the superposition clearly here. The probability of it being 0 is 50%, and the probability of it being 1 is also 50%. We've only covered the sheer basics of quantum computing here. There's a whole universe ahead of this. So be sure to delve deeper into quantum physics and check out the links in the description for more information. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.